So I think the table has turned. I mean, the economic part is has become less significant, but the defense and security parts have become more significant. I'm not undermining Japan's economic strength, but what I am saying that there has been a big shift in terms of Japan's economy and in terms of Japan's defense policy.
A nuclear-armed North Korea is firing missiles over Japan. China, meanwhile, is ramping up its military exercises around Taiwan, each bigger than the last. And Russia? It's getting closer to both Beijing and Pyongyang. Over in Washington, Donald Trump is in the White House demanding allies to shoulder more of their own defense. Across the Indo-Pacific, everyone's asking the same question. Who's really going to shape the region in the decades ahead? And right here at the center of all of these challenges, Japan. For decades, Japan led quietly, using its economic muscle, not military might. But now that's changing. Japan is spending more on defense, building stronger military partnerships, forging deeper ties with India, Australia, and the United States, and seriously rethinking the part it needs to play in a region that's growing more dangerous by the day. But here's the big question. Can Japan really become a major strategic power? Can it balance China's rise while still keeping those crucial economic ties with Beijing? And can it really rely on the United States? And what about the Quad? Is it still relevant in a region that's changing by the week? Today on The Focus, we're joined by one of Australia's top experts on Japan and India, Emeritus Professor Purnendra Jain. Purnendra, welcome to The Focus.
Thank you, John. Thank you for inviting me to your show.
Purnendra, let's begin with the obvious big question. For many decades, observers described Japan as an economic giant, but a political and strategic dwarf. When you look at Japan today under Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, is that description still valid?
Yeah, okay. So economic giant, it used to be in the 1970s, 80s, maybe until 1990s. But Japan lost some of its economic gloss in the 2000s, beginning the 2000s or end of the 1990s, being the second largest economy until 20 years ago. It was overtaken by China. So Japan is now fourth or fifth largest economy in the world. So in terms of its economic power, it has gone down a little bit in terms of its GDP. But at the same time, if you look at the other side of the coin, that is Japan's defense and strategic role, Japan has come a long way from what it used to be in the 1990s or even in the early 2000s. Now Japan, as you have already mentioned, Japan is spending more money on defense. It had a self-imposed ceiling of 1% of GDP on defense spending. And that remained for a very, very long time until 3 or 4 years ago, when Japan decided to breach or to change that 1% GDP limit. Now this year, in 26-27, Japan is about to reach 2% of its GDP. It's a dramatic shift. And this increase, of course, reflects growing networking with countries in the region, supplying some military equipment as well, and also Japan improving its own capabilities, including counterattack capabilities. So I think the table has turned. I mean, the economic part has become less significant, but the defense and security parts have become more significant. I'm not undermining Japan's economic strength, but what I am saying that there has been a big shift in terms of Japan's economy and in terms of Japan's defense policy.
So, Purnendra, many analysts trace Japan's strategic awakening back to Shinzo Abe. Would you describe Takaichi as Abe's heir and successor, politically speaking?
I think this is what Prime Minister Takaichi projects herself to be, Abe protege, and in the footsteps of Shinzo Abe, because she belongs to the same. Just for the viewers' background information, the ruling LDP, Liberal Democratic Party, has been in power for a very, very long period of time in Japan. Since 1955, only on two occasions the LDP lost its majority and opposition parties formed government, but they were not long lasting. So Takaichi, and within the LDP there are lots of factions. And Abe had one faction which was the largest faction within the LDP. And Prime Minister Takaichi comes from the same faction. It's more kind of conservative nationalist, if you like, faction of the LDP. And Takaichi is from that ideology, or that group of people or politicians in the LDP. Whereas within the LDP there are other factions. There used to be other factions or groups. They were moderate, or some were progressive. So the LDP is a mixture of moderate, progressive, and conservative. So Takaichi comes more from the conservative nationalist side of the LDP politicians.
Okay, so Japan has a lot of demographic problems. It's got a rapidly declining birth rate,
Yeah.
for instance, and yet it's wedged in a strategically difficult position. You've got Russia to the north, you've got China to the west, you've got North Korea. It's a dangerous environment. What do you think are the limits to how far and fast Japan can grow militarily as a power, considering its demographic challenges and considering the sheer weight of the threats that it faces in Northeast Asia?
I think there are several aspects to your questions. One is the question of demography and how to find new recruits for Japan's self-defense forces, right? So that has been a challenge for Japan for some time. I mean, in the past, the SDF, or the self-defense force, was kind of a stigma. No one wanted to identify themselves, even if kids from a family or families they went to SDF. No one would actually tell their neighbors that where their children were working, right?
Right.
But that has changed in Japan quite significantly, right?
Mm.
But the demographic question is a vital one, important one. So it is Japan is finding very difficult to find young people to come and work for their defense or self-defense forces. So to compensate that, I think Japan is now moving more towards AI, more technology. Now with the new warfare, as we have seen in the Russian-Ukraine situation, as well as in the Middle East, still continuing. We see how drones could be such an important part of any warfare. So Japan is very much aware of these things. So soon, under Takaichi, there will be a new national strategy paper, which will be revised from 2022 when Kishida was prime minister. So we are all waiting to see what this national strategy paper will contain, and at the same time there will be a new defense strategy paper as well. My guess is what I'm reading from several analysts is that Japan will keep its defense spending going. At the same time, it's going to move more towards technology to compensate for fewer people in Japan able to join the force. So I think Japan is very much aware. It cannot do much about its demography. It's declining. We know that Japan has lost 5 million people in the last 6, 7 years, right? So that trajectory is not going to change. because fewer people are marrying, fewer married people are willing to have children. So that demographic situation is not going to change. Japan has been trying for the last 20 years to convince the young people to have children or more children, but obviously that has fallen on deaf ear in Japan. So Japan is very much aware. So I think technology, AI, all those kinds of things, Japan has to go. And the second part, which you mentioned about China, North Korea, and Russia, that is absolutely true. I mean, Japan is in a very difficult strategic geographical environment. To the north, it has got Russia. I mean, we know that Prime Minister Abe tried, he met Putin, I don't know, 2 dozen times to reach a peace agreement, but that didn't happen. So that disappointed not just Abe but the entire LDP as well as Japan. That didn't happen because that was one of Abe's main missions, was to have a peace treaty with Russia, which did not happen. And then China. The China-Japan relations are at their worst, I would think. There are no signs of improvement. Absolutely no signs of improvement. In fact, we hear every day, more and more, uh, you know, uh, air and naval uh, approaches towards Japan from China, and economic sanctions or economic using trade as a weapon has become a standard procedure for China, and that really worries Japan. So now the Japanese, in the past, even until Abe, they tried to have this engagement and line of communication going. But I think Japan has reached a point, at least under Takaichi, where they think that any engagement with China at this stage is impossible. So they are preparing themselves for such a situation where China and Japan might have more difficult situations, and then the Taiwan question comes in the picture, right?
Of course, of course.
Yeah, if you want to talk, if you want me
We'll,
to
we'll
talk
get
about,
onto
okay.
we'll get onto Taiwan a little
Okay,
bit
yeah,
later.
sure. Then China, then North Korea. These are all nuclear enabled countries. That is the main thing. And the relationship between three countries, of Japan's relationship with these three countries, are troubled ones. And these are results of history as well as Cold War politics. And Japan finds itself in a very difficult situation to deal with three nuclear enabled powers on its north and east side of Japan. So Japan's strategy is one to increase its defense and defending capacity. Two, keep the U.S.-Japan alliance as strong as possible. And three, as a hedge, or Japan is trying to build network security and defense networks with what we know as like-minded countries. And of course, Australia is one of them. We can count on the Philippines, Vietnam, to a certain degree, India as well. So these are kind of two or three pronged strategy. Whether I don't know whether you can call Japan's grand strategy or not, but these are the three sides of Japan's strategy that Japan is trying to follow at the moment.
It's funny. I just want to follow up on something that you said a moment ago with regard to Russia and Japan and how Shinzo Abe made many entreaties to Vladimir Putin over the Northern Territories and the islands up there, but it all came to naught.
Yeah.
And yet, Japan and India have very, very strong ties. Now, embedded within those strong ties are India's own ties with Russia. During this outreach by Shinzo Abe, did India act in the capacity of an interlocutor, if you like, a diplomatic interlocutor, which would allow Japan and Russia to come to some form of final settlement over the Northern Islands, or were they absent? And if they were absent, why do you think they were absent?
No, I don't think India acted as a go-between between Japan and Russia. I don't think India wants to take that kind of a role, because India's Russia relations, as you have already mentioned, is very, very strong. I was reading a result from a poll from India. From India's perspective, or Indian people or India thinks Russia as number one trustworthy country for India. Number two is
Okay,
Japan, right?
right. Mm,
So this doesn't make sense if you think about it.
mm.
India's relations with Russia, Japan relations with India, and then Japan-India relations, they don't make one plus one equals two, right? But
Yeah,
that
three
is,
actually.
yeah, three, yeah. So it doesn't make sense. But that is the reality. And I don't think, I mean, we know that India is also a major player in BRICS, which is where Russia and China and India and South Africa and Brazil are involved. At the same time, India is in the Quad, an important member of the Quad. At the G7, India is now invited as a guest. And India has actually strengthened its relations with the United States quite significantly, right? So I was looking at the new Pew results, which just came out yesterday, and I saw that India has got a much higher trust in the Trump administration than many other countries in the Indo-Pacific region. So Indians have got trust in Trump and the US. At the same time, they vote for Russia as the most liked country. So obviously, here comes the strategic autonomy of India, how to deal, how to engage US, at the same time keep its time-tested, friendly country, Russia, right? So that's the reality at the moment. But I don't think Japan would ask India to play a role, or India would offer to play a role to for Japan and Russia to negotiate a treaty. There is absolutely no role for India.
It's a head-scratchingly difficult diplomatic conundrum
Yeah,
to find oneself in. I mean, if you're Japan, I
yeah,
suppose you would think our dear friends in India, well, they've got this special relationship. Maybe we can lean on the Indians a little bit, and maybe they can sort of drop a couple of diplomatic crumbs our way, since we do have this face-off with Russia. I
yeah,
mean, from a Japanese perspective, breaking that block of enemies that seem to be surrounding it in the Northeast
yeah.
Asian theater would be a national security concern of some note. That the Indians or Modi hasn't come forward with an idea to say, well, we like the Japanese, we want to keep their technology and their investment coming into India. So why don't we just sweeten it slightly by, acting as an arbiter between Tokyo and Moscow? That I don't understand the logic behind why India would not want to do that. But then again, I suppose by doing that, maybe it somehow threatens their relationship with Russia if they were to act in that sort of as a middle power between the two,
Mm,
trying to negotiate an end point to the hostility. But anyway, who
yeah.
knows?
Interestingly, John, when the Russia-Ukraine war started, then Prime Minister of Japan Kishida,
Hmm.
he flew to New Delhi, right? Because we know that Japan is supporting Ukraine financially, morally, and to a certain extent, small other kinds of equipment which Japan is supplying to Ukraine. So Ukraine is a huge recipient of Japan's economic aid. But when Kishida flew to New Delhi and had a meeting with Modi, Prime Minister Modi, I think he tried to persuade the Indian Prime Minister to support Ukraine. But he was greatly disappointed.
Yeah.
It did not happen. And I don't know why Prime Minister Kishida went to Delhi. Because it's a fact, India is not going to change uh, go against Russia in favor of Ukraine. That was a big no-no. But in any case, the Japanese Prime Minister tried, and they got the message that they need to work with India under these circumstances where India's Russia ties are crucial. But at the same time, India is also becoming closer to the US, and India-Japan relations have become much stronger, have been strengthened. So I think within this dynamic, strategic dynamic, Japan has learned to deal with India, and it will deal with India under those circumstances. It's not going to tell India that, why don't you? I mean, Trump tried for India, sanctions on Russian oil and all those kinds of stuff. But I don't think India is going to, India and Russia have an annual leaders level meeting. There are only two formal leaders level meetings set with India. One is with Russia and one is with Japan, right? So that's why the Japanese Prime Minister last year, Modi, traveled to Tokyo to have a summit meeting with then Prime Minister Ishiba. And now the new Japanese Prime Minister, Takaichi, is going to India early next month to have this summit meeting with. So you can understand the importance of India for Japan and Japan's importance for India. At the same time, India, Russia, and Japan, Russia, this conundrum is not going to be sorted so soon. So they have to
Yeah.
work within these kinds of conundrums. Yeah.
Okay, so turning to another alliance slash diplomatic issue.
Yeah.
Historically, Japan's post-war prosperity rested on economic growth, while it relied heavily on American security guarantees. So, Purnendra, has that model finally reached its limits?
Yes, to a certain extent. Let's be very clear at the outset that the US Japan security treaty remains quite solid, right? And from Japan's perspective, they have no choice, as a matter of fact, except to keep this alliance stronger and stronger and not go against the US on the alliance issues. At the same time, as you have already mentioned, that Japan's economy is not that great, and there have been pressures on allies, not just on Japan, but allies of the US in general, what they call greater burden sharing, right? So whether it is Australia or NATO or other South Korea, they have all kind of given some thought on those things, and they are trying to increase their defense contribution. And Japan was almost one of the last ones to come on that on board. So they started spending more and more money on defense, despite the fact that Japan, as you know, has a national debt 2.5 times of its GDP, right? So I don't think any other country, I don't know any other developed country will have that kind of national debt. So the big question is where Japan is going to fund its increased defense funding, how much it can borrow. I'm not an economist, so I don't have an answer to that. But I know the challenges and the questions I'm posing to you and for the viewers to think about those issues. So, and I think Japan's defense spending will increase even further. It's not going to go backwards. So they will cut in some areas, they will have more borrowings. I don't know how the economy will work, but the stock market of Japan is going through the roof at the moment. It's just booming. Yeah, the
Yeah.
yen is declining, but the stock market is up.
Well, if you're Donald Trump, you only just keep your eyes on the stock market and everything's fine.
Uh,
Anyway, speaking of Donald Trump, I mean, the late former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was called the Trump Whisperer. Is Takaichi in a similar vein, or is her relationship with Donald Trump a little bit more troubled?
yeah, look, let's not compare here Shinzo Abe with Takaichi, although they belong to the same party, same grouping within the party, conservative nationalist group or within the LDP. Takaichi is a new player, is a very new player. She has a long political career, but she never had any, you know, um top cabinet posts like foreign minister or defense minister. So she is quite a new player. Uh, Whereas Abe was not only himself a very seasoned player, but he came from a political family. His grandfather was Japan's prime minister, uh, you know, the famous or infamous Kishi, just after World War, just after in the 1950s. Then his father was Japan's foreign minister for a long time. And so he comes from a political family. So he knew all the tricks of the trade, if you like, right? Whereas Takaichi is quite new. And whatever I have heard about her, that she is a loner. She decides herself. She doesn't have a big group of people advising her what to do. So it could be a weakness as well as a strength of Takaichi, but I think we have to wait a little bit more to make an assessment of how Takaichi is going to perform in foreign policy, especially her relationship with Trump for the next 3 years. If she survives 3 years, that's another question, right?
Oh, well, yeah,
If she
true.
survives, given Japan's history of prime ministers changing, it's
Mm.
like the Brits have followed Japan in a sense, right? Changing
And
a
the Brits
prime.
have the Brits have followed Japan. They followed Italy. So it's like,
That's
yeah, the revolving prime minister door, right? Yeah.
but there, Japan, UK, and Italy, they
Yeah.
have got a big project going, defense project, right?
Exactly have. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
let's not diverge from Trump. So you know, Prime Minister Takaichi had two meetings with Trump, one-on-one kind of meeting, one in Tokyo and one very recently she traveled to Washington. So by all accounts, it seems that those meetings went well. I like Trump. He said, "Oh, he likes Takaichi. She's great." All those kinds of adjectives which he uses for many leaders. And he supported Takaichi when she was, she went for an election. So all those things are quite positive. I haven't seen any negative commentary on Takaichi's meeting with Trump, except her body language. I mean, there's a lot of social, yeah, except her body language, like jumping and like hugging.
Yeah. Yeah.
Japan, this is not Japan's culture. Hugging is
Mm.
not Japan's culture. Even family members, I
Mm.
haven't seen family members hugging each other, let alone a lady prime minister going to Washington hugging. Yeah, indeed, this is.
It's interesting. I mean, recently we've seen the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni have a bit of a ruction with Donald Trump,
Yeah.
and there are arguments backwards and forwards as to who started what, when, and how. But Meloni was very pro-Trump initially, and now she's very anti-Trump. And of course, she's playing the political game in Italy.
Yeah.
You don't want to appear to be too close to the United States these days if you happen to be a European leader.
Mm.
And she's playing her nationalist card now because she faces elections sometime later in the year.
Mm.
Do you think that maybe Takaichi will find a similar kind of groove with Trump? That despite all her best efforts of man managing the man baby in the White House, it just gets a bit too much, and maybe the nationalist sentiment within Japan will prevent her from going too far and may actually put pressure on her to reverse course and act more in Japan's interest, more solidly in Japan's interest. I mean, kind of like Giorgia Meloni is now doing with
Yeah.
regard to the Italian electorate. Yeah.
Japan is not located in Europe, first of all.
Oh, yeah,
Japan's
yeah.
strategic situation is completely different from Italy
Mm,
or
mm,
other European countries or NATO countries. So I don't think ever any Japanese prime minister will have a critical view of a president in office. I don't think that's going to happen. So it's not about the, the the social media commentaries are not about Japan-U.S. relations or Takaichi's and Trump's meetings. It's about Takaichi's, what's the body language, like jumping around, and those are the things that's quite new to the Japanese people, and they are not very comfortable, as it seems from the social media, comments.
yeah.
But I don't think Japan is ever going to take a view of a president or the US in the same way as we have seen the Italian prime minister taking. I mean, look, during the Iran US Israel war, which is still, we don't know where it is at the moment. But European countries almost denied, they didn't want to know about the war. At the same time, the Japanese, they did not criticize US or Israel. They did not support, but they did not criticize US.
Is there not a danger, Purnendra, that Japan adopts a head in the sand approach? Because you've just raised the Iran war, and after weeks of conflict, the United States and Israel have demonstrated their overwhelming military superiority over Iran, and yet, despite that, Iran still retains the ability to threaten the Strait of Hormuz, the very artery through which much of Japan's energy supply flows. Does this war reinforce Japan's confidence in American power, or does it expose an uncomfortable reality that even the world's strongest military cannot fully secure the energy lifelines upon which Japan depends?
Yeah, absolutely, you're right. I mean, the Japanese or Japanese policymakers, they understand the declining capacity of the United States in terms of whether it is sea lanes of communication or whether direct support, military support for a, an ally. So the Japanese are very much aware, and that's why, although they did not um, make any negative comments about Trump, somehow they maintain their Iranian connections. I mean, Japan and Iran, they have had very good relationship, and they have to have, because Japan, as we know, is the most energy dependent country. 97% of Japan's energy has to be imported, and it was less when their nuclear power plants were working. But now, the oil requirement, the gas requirements in Japan, they cannot. They have to have a very good relationship with Iran as well as other Middle East countries. They remember the 1970s, what the Japanese call the oil shocks in 1973 and 1979 during the Middle East crisis. But somehow Japan had a very good policy in place, and they really made good impression on the Middle East countries, and the oil and other energy resources kept flowing to Japan. So the Japanese are very much aware of the situation and how to keep the US engaged. At the same time, don't break the communication line with Middle East countries, including Iran.
Okay, so if we talk about energy, um, the nuclear rollback in Japan, is that being rethought by the Japanese people, considering that the war has put so much pressure on the future of their energy flows from the Gulf?
Yeah, I think yes. Some of the nuclear reactors have been restarted, but the Japanese people in general are very concerned about their safety. So the Japanese government doesn't want to make another crisis in Japan, melting down of a nuclear power plant as it happened in Fukushima in 2011 after the great tsunami and earthquake that happened. So, in the last 3 or 4 years, now Japan has increased its share of nuclear energy, and I guess it will increase a little bit more, maybe up to 15%. It used to be 22% in the mix. Now it's only 4 or 5%. So they want to increase.
Wow.
Yeah. So the
That
nuclear,
rollback was quite significant.
yeah, the role. I mean, it was zero at one stage because
What?
all the power plants were shut down.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
Wow.
zero. Yeah.
Okay.
So now
Yeah.
it's coming up little bit, bit by bit, very cautiously and very carefully. Take into confidence people, local residents where these nuclear plants are located, because they don't want any popular protests against these nuclear power plants. So they're very cautious and careful, and they're doing something and convincing and persuading the people that this is one way that we can be a little bit more less reliable than what we are. But the situation of Japan's energy, we know it's not going to change. So they have to depend on the Middle East. Of course, Australia is for gas. Australia is a big supplier, but for oil, they need the Middle Eastern oil. And their relationship with Russia is not good. They could have
Yeah.
lots of energy sources from Russia, but that's not going to happen.
Of course, of course.
Yeah.
Okay, so Purnendra, let's get back into the stories of war and peace in Asia. Of course, the one thing that hits the headlines ever so often when it's not the Middle East, it's always about Taiwan. So if we just put a scenario forward, say for instance, a war over Taiwan erupted tomorrow. I mean, what role do you think Japan realistically plays in such a scenario? Would it be as a frontline combatant, or would it be kind of like a support mechanism for US forces operating in the region against China?
Yeah, it's interesting. This is a quite a bit of hypothetical question,
Yep.
so I can give a bit of hypothetical answer as well.
Hopefully, it will never come to pass.
Yeah, I mean, look, when Takaichi became prime minister, she made a comment in the Japanese parliament that a Taiwan contingency will be considered as Japan's contingency, right? And that created a lot of uproar. Uh, in Japan, there's people who were critical that what was unstated fact was stated by a prime minister in the Japanese parliament. So the unstated fact is that Japan has also had this policy, the LDP, that Taiwan's contingency could be Japan's contingency. But that was kept kind of uh, under control within the party room. But Takaichi has stated that at the floor of the national parliament. So we know that Japan is very much aware, and it has to be. Taiwan is not very far from Japan's southernmost island, right? 110 kilometers, maybe something like nautical miles. So it's very close. So it is, and this is very, very important from Japan's defense perspective. But of course, whether there will be a war on Taiwan tomorrow, or if it happens, what will be Japan's response? At the moment, the I'm talking about legalistic constitutional aspects. The constitution does not allow Japan to attack any country or any entity. It can only act in self defense. And that's why Their military is called self-defense force, right?
Yeah.
So it's about self-defense. You cannot go on offensive. So Japan cannot go on offensive. But that is not to say that Parliament will not pass something very quickly which will allow Japan to become offensive. But these are again very hypothetical questions, hypothetical answers. But one would ask, what will the US do under the US-Japan Security Treaty, right? During 2001, when terrorist attacks took place in the US, the Harvard government said that, oh, well, attack on the US is attack on Australia, so let's support the United States, right? Under ANZUS Treaty, under the ANZUS Treaty. So whether the US will promptly come to the aid of Taiwan and defend Japan, that is a $1 million question,
Yeah.
right? Under the treaty, the US should, but who knows, it may not. So that's very much in Japan's strategic thinkers' mind, prime ministers, politicians, as to what might happen in such a situation, hypothetically, if that happens. So I cannot give you an answer to that, but I can only give you other scenarios, what might be possible and what Japan could and could not do.
Well,
Changing the constitution is not easy in Japan. Takaichi would like to change the constitution as Abe wanted to give the to give Japan's self-defense forces a constitutional status. They don't have a constitutional status because Japanese Constitution Article 9 clearly says that Japan will not maintain air, naval, or land military, and it will not arm itself. And so, under the Constitution, they cannot go and attack and be on the offensive. And it has been very difficult for Abe to do that because they did not have two-thirds majority in both houses. And then after, even if it passes parliament, it has to go for a referendum. So more than 50% of the voters have to endorse what parliament has passed. So the whole process is very, very difficult. But if there is a war-like situation, things can change very fast in Japan, as it does in many countries.
Well, I was going to say, Purnendra, that theory is deterrence. War is the practical outcome of deterrence failure. So things that we can talk about theoretically or hypothetically speaking don't necessarily always stay at the hypothetical realm because they can be those ideas
Yeah.
that we float around can be tested in the real world at some point. But talking about things in the real world being tested, we often talk about the rise of China, but we never really put it into some sort of context that people understand. Can you please tell our audience just how fundamental the economic ties are between Japan and China? That the rise of China wasn't because of the industriousness of its people per se. Yes, that's a part of it. But without the foreign investment necessary to kickstart the opening of the Chinese economy back in 1978, and arguably Japan was a key component of that, we would not be looking at a China that would be as economically competitive and militarily as strong, arguably. So, could you just tell our audience about the role that and the interdependencies that go on between Japan and China?
Okay. Let's since you said 1978, Japan by then had signed a peace treaty with China, and then the Japanese decided to pour all their resources in private investment, and China became Japan's largest ODA or aid recipient. And during those years, Japan was the world's global largest aid donor. So China was a main beneficiary of Japan's aid for infrastructure, whether it is airport or bridges or rail and those kinds of stuff. And then private investment flew into China in a very, very big way from Japan. So in a way, you are right that Japan's uh, finance and Japan's aid money supported China to grow its economy. But now that is not the situation. I mean, in the sense that Japan-China relations are strained. Yet, if you look at the trade figures for trade, China is, I think, maybe the largest trading partner of Japan, maybe after the US. So the two-way trade is in hundreds of billions of dollars. So that's still continuing. There are thousands of Japanese companies still operating in China. Some have, moved away from China, but lots of countries are still. So, in terms of trade and economic relations, they are quite significant, strong. At the same time, the strategic political relationships have deteriorated, as we discussed before. So this is kind of, the Japanese used to have a policy with the Soviet Union. They call it economic separation of economic and political relationship. That is, there are two realms to a bilateral relationship. You have political relationship, strategic relationship, and economic relationship. Sometimes economic relationships continue even though you have got political and strategic tensions. So I think this is what's happening between Japan and China at the moment. But coming to China, Japan has been quite concerned about China's activities within Japan. And one of the signature policies of Takaichi has been to establish an national intelligence agency. Japan never had one. They had intelligence capabilities through different departments and ministries, but they never had one single intelligence agency, which under Takaichi, the parliament has already passed that law. So there is a new intelligence agency, and one would think why this became necessary for the government to think about an intelligence agency. So it's not just about external, but also internal, domestic interference. So if you talk about interference in Japan's domestic politics, who could be possible target? And that is very clear who is the possible target there. So China's growing influence within Japan is also causing quite a bit of alarm within the political circles in Japan. Yeah.
Okay, so Purnendra, could Japan ever really decouple from China economically?
I don't think so. That's not possible, John, to
Yeah,
decouple.
yeah.
They can slow down. They can move away some of their companies, but decoupling is absolutely, in my view at least, given Japan's China economic ties at this stage, decoupling will be difficult. But there are some sensitive areas where what we know as economic security. So, in view of that economic security concerns, there might be some areas where the Japanese will not, invest in China and not let China come to do business in those areas. So I think the new intelligence agency will will investigate into those things and advise government what to do about those things. But in terms of production, civilian production, in terms of other kinds of economic activities, trade, that's not going to be totally decoupled. It's just impossible, I think. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, time is against us, Purnendra. We've got
Yeah.
about roughly 10 minutes. So I'd
Yeah.
like some quick fire responses to a few
All right.
things that we've
Sure.
got. And it's going to be hard because these are big questions.
Okay.
So North Korea has been a security concern for Japan for decades. How is Japan going about trying to develop a counter to, obvious North Korean provocations? They've been flying missiles over Japan now for quite some time. They are a nuclear power. Kim Jong-un is as unpredictable as Donald Trump in many ways. So, it's another degree of uncertainty that Japan has to sort of navigate forward with. So, how do you see that relationship, and can Japan push back successfully on North Korean provocations moving forward now that North Korea is getting closer to both Russia and China?
Okay. On the North Korean question, as you have said, yeah, it has been a long time. But Japan's strategy is to deal with North Korea if it is just North Korea. But if this is a triangle of North Korea, Russia, and China, that places Japan in a very difficult situation, right? Uh, for that, I don't know how much Japan is prepared, but I don't think Japan is expecting the three coming together and then attacking Japan. I think that's not a scenario which I have read or seen in Japan. So I think it's more bilateral, dealing with North Korea, dealing with China, dealing with Russia, although they are together as a strong group um, surrounding Japan or around Japan. But I don't think, I haven't seen anything which they would say that together they will, go and attack Japan and things like that. Sorry, my answer was a bit vague here.
No,
Uh,
no, that's okay.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, but it's a complicated issue because, of
yeah,
course, North Korea is the archetypal strategically autonomous player. It's the
yeah,
lone wolf in the region.
yeah, yeah,
But we have seen diplomatic outreach from Pyongyang to Moscow, from Pyongyang to Beijing, and there is a bit of a competition
yeah.
for Russian and Chinese influence over Pyongyang. And I know that the show is far too short for us to pursue this, but just to sort of set the listener
Yeah,
up to
I mean,
understand.
just to
Yeah.
add, one good thing which has happened recently is that Japan South Korea ties have or relations have improved quite
Yeah.
significantly.
Yeah.
And that tells us a lot because South Korea is equally threatened by North Korea, if not so much by China or by Russia uh, in the same way as Japan is. So Japan, South Korea better strengthened ties will help Japan deal with the North Korean situation, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And once
Definitely.
they are together, it will be difficult even for China to do something which will unnecessarily trouble Japan and South Korea. So I guess the better ties which has happened between Japan and South Korea is a good development in the
Mm.
region. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's bring this conversation home. Australia and Japan have been remarkably close strategic partners. How does Japan view Australia today?
Japan views Australia very positively, absolutely no doubt about it. And of course, Australia views Japan very positively because only last week I think the Lowy poll came out, right? And Japan has been constantly voted as I don't have the figures with me, but I think it has been constantly voted as the at the top. So confidence in Japan is pretty high in the 80s from Australian perspective. And
Yeah.
from the there is no such poll in Japan, but whatever we know and whatever we have seen and heard is extremely positive about Australia. So the relationship between Australia and Japan, I mean, the Prime Minister, the Japanese Prime Minister, when she came last month, I think, to to Canberra. She described Japan-Australia relations as quasi alliance. And quasi-alliance is, I don't know what exactly it means, but certainly it communicates the message that how important Australia and Japan are
Yeah.
bilaterally. And one of the things which you and I and your viewers would know is the frigate deal, which
Yes.
happened between Japan and Australia. That's a big thing, right? It's a big thing because this is the first time Japan has signed a contract with any country selling its big ticket item defense export.
Yeah.
And that might be a trigger that might lead Japan to have such an agreement with other countries in the region. We have already seen the Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, maybe possibly India at some stage. So Japan is now emerging as a kind of significant defense exporter. It's a kind of, Japan has broken that taboo of, in Japan, they used to call that we don't want to be merchant of death. In other words, we don't want to export arms.
Yeah.
Arms were only for Japan, self-defense force, or some for the United States under the treaty, but never ever for other countries. But that Japan has come out of that situation. Now it's going to, actively seeking exports of arms. That will create their own problems, but let's not talk about those things at this stage.
Okay. Well, the clock has now beat us,
Yeah, yeah,
Purnendra. It's taken us
yeah.
right up to the hour. So, Emeritus Professor Purnendra Jain, thanks for sharing your insights on the
Thanks,
focus.
John. That was so nice to have this conversation with you, and I hope I have made some contribution which your viewers will like, and maybe we'll get some comments from them as well. Thank you again, John.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you,
All
Purnendra.
right. Okay. Bye.
Japan finds itself at the intersection of many defining challenges in our time: China's rise, North Korea's unpredictability, Russia's growing partnership with Beijing, questions over American leadership, and the emergence of India as a major strategic actor. What becomes clear from today's discussion is that Japan is no longer simply responding to events, it's increasingly shaping the Indo-Pacific's future. Whether through its alliance with the United States, its partnerships with Australia and India, or its role in the Quad, Japan's choices in the years ahead will matter far more beyond its own shores than we give it credit for right now. Now, on to audience questions. Has Japan become the most important country in the Indo-Pacific after the United States and China, or do we still underestimate Japan's strategic influence? If the United States became less willing to guarantee security in Asia, should Japan consider developing its own nuclear deterrent? The Quad was designed to help maintain a stable Indo-Pacific. Is it becoming a meaningful strategic partnership, or is it largely a diplomatic talkfest? Let us know in the comments section below. To our audience, thanks for tuning in, and many thanks to our producers Neil Smart and Lynn Sear. If you've enjoyed today's discussion, please like, subscribe, and share this episode across your networks. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay focused on the forces shaping our world. I'm Dr. John Bruni. Thanks for listening.